Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And as part of my How to Make the Most of Your Leftovers series, we're going to be making venison pot pie. And this is from the venison roast I made the other day, and you can find a video on that right up here. So to get started, I am going to put into my saucepan here about 2 cups of raw goat's milk. You can use whatever whole milk you want. Now if that looked a little lumpy, it was because I added a little bit of whole powdered milk to it, and I'm going to put in a little bit more, so a couple of tablespoons. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I don't have any heavy whipping cream on hand, and a lot of times, and I do have some half and half, but I need to save that for something else. And to make a good, rich, creamy pot pie, it's good to have some whipping cream in there with it too. And so as long as you have at least your whole milk and your whole milk powder, you can just make it that much thicker by adding a couple tablespoons or so of your organic whole powdered milk. And I will be linking to this below. Now, when it comes to pot pie, I don't do it the same every time. It just depends on what I have on hand and what I feel like adding to my, to the pie as a whole. And it's also going to depend on what things, if it's in the summertime, what things are coming fresh out of my garden. Today, obviously, it's winter time. I don't have anything coming fresh from my garden right now except for some green onions. So believe it or not, still getting some. So I'm going to throw those in there. And notice that I'm just throwing these in here now, but I did forget to do one thing. I'm going for my thickener. What I prefer to use for my pot pie, I've tried several different kinds, and anything works. You can use tapioca starch, you can use arrowroot powder, you can use regular white flour or whole wheat flour. But for me on the pot pie, for some reason, I prefer rice flour most of all. And I'm going to be putting in a 1/4 cup of that. So there we go. There's my rice flour. Now you got to do that before you start adding any other ingredients. Now most people, what they would do is they would add their flour into their milk and then thicken it up first. Me, I don't see the need for that, especially with what I'm doing. Now if you're using raw vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and things like that, then what you may want to do is cook those. You're going to want to saute those in butter or something a little bit first, or coconut oil or whatever, and get them soft before you add them in. But since I'm using a lot of food storage items, from my own dehydrated stuff to some freeze-dried goods, I don't need to worry about that. That's going to go directly into my pot. So I will be using my favorite dehydrated onions, putting in a couple tablespoons of those. Again, I'll be linking to any of these below that I have links to, especially the Mother Earth products, which is what a lot of this stuff that's not mine is what that is. The mushrooms for sure. The last time I did a pot pie, I used these freeze-dried mushrooms, which I sealed up last time I used them. Whew. And man, they turned out good. So I'm going to put in a couple handfuls of that. So that's at least a 1/2 cup right there maybe of the freeze-dried mushrooms. I love those things. I highly recommend those. And some sage. We'll put in, about a good heavy teaspoon. Maybe that's probably about 1/2 tablespoon. Now these are my mixed greens, as I'm always talking about. I put them in just about everything I make when it comes to meals like this. A good handful of those. Everything in here from grape leaves to kale, stinging nettle, dandelion leaves, and you can find a video on this right up here. I did the sage, and I'm going to go ahead and put in some granulated garlic, even though I'm going to be putting in my own homegrown fermented garlic, and I have a video on this as well, and I will link to that right up here. Okay, just keep mixing those things in here. Now, another thing I like to add from time to time is my dehydrated lavender leaves. they just add a nice flavor that's just a little bit different. Somewhat similar to rosemary, though much more mild and sweet. So I'm putting a pinch of those in. And some dehydrated carrots. Love dehydrated carrots. I use them in so many things, especially for using in my pot pies and adding to soups. I'll put a couple handfuls of those in. If you get a good non-GMO freeze-dried corn, that is excellent in the pot pie and in soups. Now this is first time trying this. This is the dehydrated, not freeze-dried, celery I got from Mother Earth News. Carrots and celery are something I have yet to grow well yet. I keep trying, but so that's why I like to get the dehydrated or freeze-dried things like that. But I still do that with things I grow well, like onions and garlic and potatoes. I still like buying the dehydrated potatoes, and I'm probably going to add some dehydrated potatoes to this as well, and I forgot to get those out. Now another thing I like to add is my homegrown golden oregano, and I have a video on this so you can see what it looks like. It's just a beautiful herb that you can grow in your garden, and it's just a much sweeter and far more mild oregano than your typical oregano that I would like to use. I like to use that in my Italian cooking, but for everything else I like to use the golden oregano. But you can find that video right up here so you can see what it looks like. Just a beautiful addition to the garden that's also useful as an herb. And does still have a lot of the same benefits as your regular oregano. It's not going to be as high since it's not quite as potent. Now I'm putting in a pinch of thyme. I'm just about to the bottom. Need some more thyme. Don't we all need more thyme? More thyme. T-I-M-E, thyme, as well as T-H-Y-M-E. Alright, now these are my own homegrown tomatoes. I love to dehydrate a lot of my tomatoes up for using in different dishes. I've also been doing, I also did a lot of making flakes, tomato flakes for using in sauces, and that I'm just really loving that. And I also have a video to that. If I haven't already used up my cards, I'll put that one up here too. Okay, so there's that. I still have the meat to go, and I'm going to put in about a tablespoon, no, not a tablespoon, excuse me, a teaspoon of my Himalayan salt. My two favorites are the Himalayan and Red Mineral. And I link to both of those. And then I've got some leftover black olives, so I'm just going to go ahead and toss those in there. That's another great thing about pot pies. You can just throw in whatever you got in your fridge. I do have some green beans thawing out there next to the wood stove that I was thinking about using in this, but I think I'll use those in something else for a different dish. Now here is the last of the venison, and I have two other videos out. You know, the first one where I did the roast and the other one where I did the Mongolian venison, and then this is the last of the meat, but I still have one more dish to make out of this venison from the broth. So that will be a video coming later. So I'm just going to throw that chopped up meat in there. And let me go ahead and get some potatoes. I just like the way potatoes taste in this, so I'm going to throw a handful of dehydrated potatoes in here too. And as you can see, I've been getting these directly from the company, and I'll be putting links to these below, my affiliate links, whoops. And I'm really liking that I can get it in these Mylar bags. And these come with they're a good thick bag with a nice a good Ziploc on them. So I'm going to see how well these do after opening, keeping them in the Mylar bags, and seeing if I don't have to repackage them into jars. So I'll give that a try, and I'll update you on that later to see how those hold up. So, now, as it stands, what you may want to do as you're cooking this, if you're using a lot of dehydrated and freeze-dried things like I'm doing, it's going to thicken up pretty good between the flour and all the freeze-dried stuff. So keep an eye on it, and then you're probably going to want to add some more milk as you go. I always like to start off with about 2 cups and then just see how things are going along. So what I'm going to do is put this on my wood stove, and I probably won't take you in there this time. You've probably seen enough videos of that. And I'm just going to let this cook on there kind of slowly and get good and thick, and then I'll bring it back in here and I'll have my pie crust ready to go, and yeah, and so I'll be back with the next step. Alright, I decided I'd go ahead and show you making a pie crust. Even though I have another video out, I figured it was time to do an update, and I'll probably do another video down the road just on pie crust, but I'll show you what I'm doing today for the pot pie. Now, when I make pie crust for my pot pies, I prefer to use my own home milled flour, and this is 100% organic hard white wheat flour, and I just got done milling this up, and I have 2 cups of this in here. I really like using the whole wheat for the pot pies. For fruit pies, you know, cream pies and stuff, I tend to like to go a half and half, like half wheat flour and half organic white flour. Now for this much, for 2 cups, this is a 2 crust pie recipe, I do 1 teaspoon of salt. And I always prefer, I used to use a pastry cutter back when I started making pies when I was a teen. And then later found I prefer just using a fork to mix everything in with. And I also have another way of mixing in my fat that I'll show you when I get to it. So after you blend in the salt, you're going to want to add in some fat. Now I am sorry, I do not have measurements. Back when I first started making pies when I was a teenager, I went strictly by the book on measurements for fat. Now, because I know what a pie crust is supposed to feel like, I just go by feel. So that might be about a 1/4 cup of the organic palm shortening. And I get this from Tropical Traditions, and I think I could probably find you a link to this and put it below. And I also like using butter. So I'll do about equal amounts of the grass-fed butter and the organic shortening. And just going by sight, I don't know, like I said, I go by feel. If I feel like after I cut this in with my fork and start working it with my hands, it needs a little more shortening, then I'll add it in. I just know how it's supposed to feel. Now, I like to really get my fat blended in the rest of the way by doing it this way with my hands. I just keep rolling it and getting that fat broken up into smaller and smaller pieces. To me, this is just a little quicker, and I feel it just does a better job of getting the fat broken up into tiny little pieces, because the way you get a flaky crust, one of the things is making sure that your fat is broken up as small as possible. Now, that's plenty of fat right there. I can tell by the way it feels and the way it presses together. So you see that? So I wouldn't want to add any more fat to this. This could be even just a little bit too fatty. I'm going to add in my cold water a little bit at a time. I used to also be very religious about how I did the cold water. And that was 1 tablespoon at a time. Now I just kind of pour it in there. Just want to keep adding your cold water a little at a time and blend it until everything starts to stick together, and you end up with just pretty much, you know, if you can take it and you can push it into a ball like that right there, that's plenty of water. It's wet enough. And then what you're going to want to do is just push it together. So if you've never made a pie crust before, you don't need your pie crust. Never need your pie crust. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very tough crust. The less you work it, the better your pie crust is going to turn out. Rolling, though, a lot of times I'll still use my whole wheat flour. I just kind of prefer to use the white flour for rolling it out on. And I'm going to cut this in half. Okay, and since it's best to work with 1 piece at a time, to keep that one from drying out, I'm going to go ahead and put the bowl over the top of that. And then I start to press it out with my hands to get started. And I notice I just keep turning it onto the flour. And though I really like the wooden rolling pins Mr. Rain made me, and they do work good for pie crust, when it comes to pie crust, I just love my marble rolling pin. Now, I bought this rolling pin at the organic store in town that we rarely are able to get into. However, if by chance I can find this on Amazon, I don't know that I can, Okay, so lifting it up and putting it in the pan, and when working with whole wheat is going to be the trickiest part. Some people like to roll it over their rolling pin. That, I don't know, that just doesn't work for me. I've always done it this way, where I take my spatula and just work it around the edges of the pie crust, loosening it up from the bottom. Sometimes I'll add a little flour and then just carefully fold it over. Fold it in half first, and then I'll fold it in quarters. Once you get it folded in half, the rest of it's easier. Then I pick it up and put it into my pie pan this way and then unfold it. And again, whole wheat is very fragile. It'll fall apart, but that's another reason why I am more likely to use it for my pot pies, because it's not as big a deal on the pot pies as it is for like the cream pies, for instance. You really need it to hold together if you're doing a one crust pie. The venison pot pie filling is ready to go. It's nice and thick. I didn't add any more milk to it. Let me see what it looks like once I get it in the pan. Since I was doing this on the wood stove, the handle is very hot. Get that all in there. Well, I could have made a little bit more. Sometimes I end up making too much and then the pie is just so full. So this is actually kind of shallow. Usually I have way too much. So I would recommend putting more milk in. Now I'm going to go ahead and roll out the top crust and then put that on there. You know what I forgot to add? I forgot to add black pepper. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that in there. So I love red pepper. Black pepper on certain things like pot pie and macaroni and cheese, I love that better. And Mr. Rain is a black pepper fanatic. Alright, well, I finished making the pie crust and I had a bit of a disaster and almost wanted to cut it out altogether and forget the video. But then I remembered, hey, everybody, this is real life. So what if I've been making pie crust for 35 years? Disasters still happen. And I believe part of it was I did have a little bit too much fat in the pie crust, like I thought, like I said, but also working with whole wheat, it is just very fragile and it's going to fall apart on you. But I want to show you what I did to salvage it, because that was the other reason I decided I need to finish out this video, just to show you that not only do these things happen, you can still save it. Now, it doesn't look perfect, it's not beautiful, but what I did was I took the pie crust scraps and just made some little stars and some little leaves and covered up the worst part of it. And if it was just for me and Mr. Rain, I wouldn't worry about it. I'd just bake it up and we'd eat it, and who cares? It's just for the two of us. But if you're making this for other people, you want it to look a little bit nicer. Here's a way that you can salvage it. Just be creative. I'm going to bake this for an hour in my toaster oven. I'm going to check it at about the 45-minute mark, like I always do, and see how it's looking at 400 degrees. And then when I'm all done with it, I'll go ahead and take a picture, because that's going to be later in the day. This is just how I do things. I get the meal all ready to go as early as possible, and then basically the baking or heating through is done just before we're ready to eat it. So that way I have this done and I can clean up the mess before we have dinner. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new, or if nothing else, just a new way to use up some leftover meats and your freeze-dried and dehydrated food stored items, whether it be from your garden or purchased from the store, to make a new and yummy meal. Alright, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.